Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My manager is this middle-aged guy who thinks he's way more important than he actually is. And our HR director Karen is the type who sends passive-aggressive emails about coffee cups in the sink. Last Tuesday started like any other day. I got to the office around 8:30, grabbed my coffee, and settled into my cubicle. The morning was busy with quarterly reports due, but by lunchtime things had quieted down. I had finished most of my urgent tasks and was just working on some data entry that could honestly wait until tomorrow. Around 1:45 I heard the familiar crackle of the PA system. Karen's voice came through sounding more authoritative than usual. She announced that there would be a mandatory fire drill at 2 p.m. She reminded everyone about the evacuation procedures, told us to exit through our designated routes and gather at the assembly point in the parking lot. She specifically said not to use elevators. Then she added something that caught my attention. She said if anyone left the property during the drill, they shouldn't bother coming back that day. I paused my typing and looked around. A few co-workers rolled their eyes. Fire drills were always announced ahead of time here, unlike real emergencies, so nobody took them too seriously. But something about Karen's tone made it clear she was trying to prevent people from using the drill as an excuse to leave early. The clock hit 2 and the alarm started blaring. Everyone got up from their desks with the usual grumbling and started filing toward the exits. I grabbed my keys and phone, thinking I might as well take them since I was getting up anyway. When we walked down the hallway, I found myself behind 2 of my co-workers. They were complaining about how much they hated these drills and what a waste of time they were. One of them said, at least it was a nice day, better than being stuck inside. The other one grumbled about having to come back and pretend to work for another 3 hours. I followed everyone down the stairs and out the main exit. The parking lot was filling up with employees, all looking varying degrees of annoyed. Karen was standing near the building entrance with a clipboard, probably checking off names or something. But when I stood there in the afternoon sun, I realized something. My work for the day was essentially done. I had no meetings scheduled, no urgent deadlines, and my manager had left for a client meeting an hour ago. My car was parked just 2 blocks away in the street parking I'd snagged that morning, and Karen had been very clear about the instructions. So I just kept walking. Nobody seemed to notice at first. Everyone was chatting in their little groups, complaining about the interruption. I walked past the edge of the parking lot, down the sidewalk, and turned the corner toward my car. The whole walk took maybe 5 minutes. I got in my car, started it up, and drove home to my apartment. It was 2:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, and I was free. I spent the rest of the day reading a book I've been meaning to finish and making a nice dinner. It felt like playing hooky from school, except I was a grown adult who had followed the instructions given to me. The next morning I showed up at my usual time. Everything seemed normal, until around 10:30 when my manager appeared at my cubicle. He looked confused, which wasn't unusual for him, but this time it seemed directed at me specifically. He asked if he could talk to me for a minute. I said sure and asked what was up. He told me that Karen had mentioned I wasn't at the assembly point after the fire drill yesterday. She said I had just disappeared. He wanted to know what happened. I looked at him and told him I had left the property during the drill. He asked why I would do that, sounding genuinely puzzled. I explained that the announcement had said if we left the property during the drill, we shouldn't bother coming back. So I didn't come back. He stared at me for a long moment, his mouth slightly open. I could practically see the gears turning in his head when he processed what I'd said. He told me that wasn't what they meant. I asked how I was supposed to know what they meant when I was just following the instructions that were given over the PA system. He explained that they meant don't leave and then come back the same day. They didn't mean take the rest of the day off. I pointed out that wasn't what was said though. The instruction had been pretty clear. He blinked a few more times, then seemed to realize he was trapped by the literal interpretation of Karen's words. He told me not to do it again, but his voice lacked conviction. I asked him what exactly I shouldn't do again. Follow instructions? He said I knew what he meant, but he walked away without saying anything else. I could tell he was frustrated, but what could he really do? I had followed the exact instructions given to all employees. If they wanted to write me up for that, they'd have to explain to HR why they were disciplining someone for doing exactly what they were told. About an hour later, I saw Karen walking toward my desk with a determined look on her face. This should be interesting. She told me she needed to speak with me about yesterday. I said okay and waited. She said I had left during the fire drill and that wasn't acceptable. I reminded her that I had followed the instructions that were announced. She insisted that wasn't what those instructions meant, and I knew it. I apologized but said I could only follow the instructions when they were given to me. If there was a different meaning intended, perhaps the announcement should have been more specific. She told me not to get smart with her and accused me of deliberately misinterpreting what was said. I replied that I had interpreted exactly what was said. If she meant something different, she should have said something different. She stood there for a moment, clearly wanting to argue but realizing she was in the same position with my manager. How do you punish someone for following directions? She said this kind of behavior was exactly why they had to treat everyone like children around here. I told her I wouldn't know anything about that since I just followed the rules. She turned and walked away. Later that day, I overheard Karen talking to someone in HR about how they needed to revise the language they use for fire drill announcements. Apparently, my literal interpretation had highlighted a problem with their communication that they hadn't considered. I never got written up, never got in trouble, and never had to explain myself to anyone higher up the chain. And now, whenever they do fire drill announcements, they're much more specific about what they mean. The company I work at had always been pretty flexible about work arrangements. Before the pandemic, we could work from home once or twice a week if needed. During the pandemic, we went fully remote and productivity actually increased. When things started opening up again, they kept a hybrid policy where we could work from home 3 days a week. The work itself was demanding but rewarding. I managed client campaigns, coordinated with different departments, and had built solid relationships with both my colleagues and clients. My performance reviews were always stellar, and I genuinely enjoyed the creative aspects of the job. The team was tight-knit, and we'd often grab lunch together or hang out after work occasionally. Then about 6 months ago, we got a new manager. She came from a very traditional corporate background where she'd apparently climbed the ladder at some old-school finance company. From day one, she made it clear she didn't approve of our flexible work culture. She'd make little comments about how real professionals show up to the office and how you can't build team chemistry through a computer screen. At first, it was just passive-aggressive remarks. She'd schedule unnecessary in-person meetings and make pointed comments when someone joined from home. She'd walk around the office making notes on who was there and who wasn't, even though our work output hadn't changed at all. The whole team started feeling this weird tension that hadn't existed before. Then came the announcement 3 weeks ago. She called an all-hands meeting on a Monday morning and told everyone they needed to be there for the important announcement. She explained that, effective immediately, we were implementing a new attendance policy where everyone was expected in the office every single day during business hours with no exceptions. My colleague sitting next to me raised her hand and asked about sick days and whether we could still work from home when we weren't feeling well but could still be productive. The manager's response was firm and uncompromising. She said, if you're sick enough that you can't come to the office, then you're too sick to work. She didn't want to see anyone trying to work from home just because they had the sniffles. She said we were adults and adults show up to work unless they're literally in a hospital bed. Another teammate asked about doctor's appointments or family emergencies. The manager told us to plan better and schedule appointments after work or on weekends. She said those should be rare enough that they won't impact our attendance record. The room went completely silent. I could see people exchanging worried looks. Some of my colleagues had kids, elderly parents, or chronic health conditions that sometimes required flexibility. The manager continued by saying she knew this might seem strict, but we needed to get back to professional standards. She claimed that working from home had made everyone too comfortable and she could see productivity slipping. She said when we're in the office, she can see that we're actually working. That last comment really got under my skin because our team had consistently exceeded our targets for the past 2 years, mostly while working hybrid. But I kept my mouth shut. The next 2 weeks were miserable. People were dragging themselves in with minor illnesses, stressed about childcare arrangements, and generally just demoralized. The office atmosphere became tense and resentful. Instead of the collaborative environment we used to have, everyone was just trying to look busy whenever she walked by. Then last Tuesday, I woke up feeling absolutely terrible. My throat felt like I'd swallowed glass, my head was pounding, and I had that bone-deep exhaustion that comes with a proper fever. I took my temperature, and it was 101.3 degrees. Normally, I would have just worked from home, taken some medicine, and powered through my tasks from bed. But I remembered her words crystal clear about being too sick to work if we couldn't come to the office. I threw on some clothes, grabbed a box of tissues, put on a mask, and headed to the office. I figured I'd make a point while following her rules to the letter. I must have looked like death warmed over when I walked in. I was pale, clearly feverish, and coughing every few minutes despite the mask. I sat up at my desk with my tissues, hand sanitizer, and a bottle of water, and got to work. Within the first hour, I'd used half a box of tissues. My coughing fits were getting worse, and I could see my colleagues giving me concerned looks from across the room. I made sure to sanitize my hands and wipe down everything I touched, but I was clearly a walking germ factory. Around 10 a.m., she walked by my desk and did a double take. She told me I looked terrible and asked if I was okay. I explained that I was just a little under the weather, but I was there as requested. She suggested that maybe I should consider going home, but I reminded her that she was very clear that if I'm too sick to come to the office, I'm too sick to work. Since I could still work, I figured I should be there. She looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything else and walked away. By noon, I'd blown through an entire box of tissues. My coughing was getting so bad that I was disrupting people's phone calls. I was sanitizing my desk, keyboard, and phone every 30 minutes, but I was clearly spreading germs just by existing in the space. My colleague at the next desk leaned over and told me I should go home because I was going to get everyone sick. I acknowledged that I knew this, but explained I was following the new policy about not being able to work from home if I was sick. Around 2 p.m. she came back to my desk looking annoyed. She said my coughing was disruptive and maybe I should go home after all. I thanked her for the concern but explained I was being productive. I told her I'd already finished the Johnson campaign revisions and was halfway through the Miller presentation. I said I'd hate to waste a sick day when I was clearly capable of working. She looked frustrated but walked away again. By 4 p.m. I was feeling even worse, but I was determined to make my point. I'd gone through 2 boxes of tissues and was sanitizing everything compulsively. Several people had moved to conference rooms to escape my coughing fits. At 5 p.m. sharp, I packed up my stuff and headed home, making sure to sanitize my workspace one more time before leaving. Wednesday morning, I felt even worse but dragged myself in again. This time, I looked even more miserable, and my coughing was almost constant. I could see people actively avoiding my general area. The manager asked why I didn't stay home. I reminded her that she told us not to and that I was following the policy she implemented. I explained I was there, I was working, and I was being as responsible as possible by wearing a mask and sanitizing everything. She pointed out that I was clearly very sick, but I countered that I was still productive and asked if that wasn't what mattered. She looked increasingly uncomfortable, but didn't change her tune. By Thursday, 2 other people had called in sick. By Friday, it was up to 3 people out with what was clearly the same bug I had. The office was noticeably quieter, and the remaining staff were shooting dirty looks in my direction and toward our manager's office. Friday afternoon, I got an email from HR asking to schedule a meeting for the following Monday. I had a pretty good idea what it was about. Monday morning rolled around, and I was called into a conference room with HR and my manager. The HR representative said they'd received some feedback about the new attendance policy and were concerned about workplace health and safety. My manager claimed she thought there might have been some miscommunication about expectations. I disagreed and said I didn't think there was any miscommunication. I explained that I followed the policy exactly as she explained it, reminding them that if I'm too sick to come to the office, I'm too sick to work. Since I was clearly capable of working, I came to the office. The HR representative said they appreciated my dedication but were concerned about the spread of illness in the workplace. I acknowledged the concern and explained that I wore a mask, sanitized constantly, and maintained as much distance as possible. But I reminded them that the policy was very clear about not working from home when sick. The HR representative looked uncomfortable and looked at my manager before announcing they were going to revise the attendance policy to better balance productivity with health concerns. My manager added that they wanted to make sure everyone felt comfortable taking care of themselves when they weren't feeling well. I asked if this meant we could work from home when we're sick now. The HR representative confirmed that yes, that seemed like a reasonable accommodation for everyone's well-being. I said that was great, and since I was still not feeling 100%, I'd planned to work from home for the rest of the week. And that's exactly what I did. I worked from home the rest of that week and honestly got more done than I had all month. No interruptions, no need to look busy, just pure productivity. The policy change wasn't just for sick days. They quietly rolled back the entire everyone in the office everyday rule. We're back to the hybrid schedule that actually worked for everyone. My manager hasn't made any more comments about real professionals or team chemistry. In fact, she's been notably absent from team meetings lately. Word around the office is that upper management wasn't too happy about the disruption to productivity and the complaints from staff. I'm still working mostly from home, still exceeding my targets, and still sanitizing everything obsessively because that cold really was nasty. But now I do it from the comfort of my own home office, where I can cough as much as I need to without disrupting anyone else's day. I've been dealing with entitled people my whole life, but nothing prepared me for what happened to my son last month. It still makes my blood boil when I think about it. My 15-year-old boy has always been a good kid. He gets decent grades, stays out of trouble, and has a solid group of friends. They're typical teenagers who like to hang out at the old stone bridge near our neighborhood after school. It's a popular spot where kids have been gathering for decades. The bridge spans over Miller Creek, which runs about 8 feet deep in most places. That particular Tuesday started like any other. My son and his 3 friends had finished their homework and decided to meet at the bridge around 4 in the afternoon. They usually just sit on the stone wall, talk about video games, complain about teachers, and throw pebbles into the water below. Harmless teenage stuff. According to what my son told me later, they had been there for maybe 20 minutes when this woman came storming up to them. She was probably in her 40s, wearing a business suit like she had just gone off work. Her face was angry, and she was practically shaking with rage. The woman demanded to know which one of them had beat up her son. The boys looked at each other confused. None of them had any idea what she was talking about. My son politely told her that she must have them confused with someone else because they didn't know her son. But Karen wasn't having any of it. She accused them of lying and said she knew it was kids from this neighborhood who had attacked her boy at school that day. She was determined to find out who did it. One of his friends asked what school her son went to, explaining that they all attended Jefferson Middle School. Karen said her son went to Roosevelt Elementary, but insisted that didn't matter. She claimed that older kids like them thought they could pick on little ones and get away with it. My son tried to explain that they had never even been to Roosevelt Elementary and didn't know any kids from there. That's when things got really heated. Instead of listening to reason, Karen became even more aggressive. She started accusing them of lying and saying they were protecting each other. The boys kept trying to explain that they had nothing to do with whatever happened to her son, but she wouldn't hear it. Karen told them she thought they were so smart, but she was going to teach them what happens when they mess with her family. One of the friends told her she needed to calm down and that they really didn't know what she was talking about. Karen snapped back that she didn't need to calm down. Her son had come home with a black eye and a bloody nose, and someone was going to pay for it. My son tried one more time to reason with her. He's always been the peacemaker, in his friend group, the one who tries to defuse situations before they get out of hand. He told her he was sorry her son got hurt, but it really wasn't them. He suggested maybe she should talk to his teacher or the principal to find out who actually did it. That suggestion seemed to push Karen over the edge completely. She stepped closer to my son, who was still sitting on the stone wall of the bridge. She called him a smart mouth and said she would show him what happens when kids talk back to adults. Before anyone could react, she put both hands on my son's chest and shoved him as hard as she could. He lost his balance and fell backward off the bridge, dropping 8 feet into the creek below with a loud splash. For a moment, everyone just stood there in shock. Karen seemed as surprised as anyone by what she had just done. My son's friends were screaming and looking over the edge of the bridge. One of them yelled at Karen, asking if she was crazy and pointing out that she had just pushed him into the river. Thankfully, my son is a strong swimmer. He had taken lessons since he was little and was on the school swim team for 2 years. After the initial shock of hitting the cold water, he managed to get his bearings and swim to the bank about 30 yards downstream. Karen realized the gravity of what she had done and started backing away from the bridge. She insisted that he was fine and that kids jumped off that bridge all the time. One of the friends called her insane and said she could have killed him. He yelled that what she did was assault. While Karen was making excuses, another friend had the presence of mind to take out his phone. He snapped a clear photo of Karen and then got a shot of her license plate as she hurried to her car. She was trying to leave the scene, but the boys kept yelling at her. One of them shouted that they were calling the police and that she couldn't just push someone off a bridge and drive away. Karen yelled back that he shouldn't have been mouthing off to her. She said this was what happened when parents didn't teach their kids respect. She got in her car and sped off, but the damage was already done. One of the friends had called the police while helping my son climb up the muddy bank. When the officers arrived, they took statements from all the boys and got the photos from the friend's phone. By the time I got the call and rushed to the scene, my son was wrapped in a blanket that one of the officers had given him. He was shivering and upset, but physically okay. The police were already running the license plate number. It took them less than 2 hours to track Karen down at her home across town. When they knocked on her door, she initially tried to deny everything. But when they showed her the photos and told her there were 4 witnesses, she finally admitted to what she had done. The officer who handled our case told me that Karen kept insisting she was justified because she thought the boys had hurt her son. When they contacted her son's school, they found out that the incident she was so angry about had happened during lunch between 2 kids in the same grade. It had nothing to do with teenagers from our neighborhood. We pressed charges immediately. Assault on a minor is taken very seriously in our state, especially when it involves pushing a child off a bridge into water. Karen tried to get a plea deal, but we refused. We wanted her to face the full results of her actions. During the trial, her lawyer tried to paint her as a concerned mother who had made a mistake in the heat of the moment. But the prosecution showed the photos, played the testimony from all 4 boys, and demonstrated how her actions could have easily resulted in serious injury or death. The judge was not sympathetic to her excuse. He told her that even if the boys had been involved in the incident with her son, her response was completely inappropriate and dangerous. He pointed out that she had taken it upon herself to physically assault a minor based on nothing more than her own assumptions. She had endangered the young man's life over something he had absolutely nothing to do with. Karen was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay for my son's medical evaluation and our legal fees. My son still hangs out at the bridge with his friends. I've been dating my boyfriend for 8 months now. We met through a mutual friend at a coffee shop and things have been pretty good between us. He's funny, smart, and we share a lot of interests. The only thing that sometimes bothers me is how he tends to avoid confrontation, even when it's necessary. He always says he prefers to keep the peace rather than deal with drama. Last week, he invited me to dinner with his old college friends. I was actually excited about it because he'd been talking about introducing me to them for months. He always spoke highly of this group and how close they all were during university. I thought it would be nice to finally meet the people who were such a big part of his life. The restaurant was one of those trendy places downtown with dim lighting and expensive appetizers. When we arrived, 5 of his friends were already seated at a large round table. Everyone seemed friendly enough when he introduced me. They asked the usual questions about what I do for work, how we met, that sort of thing. I was starting to relax and actually enjoy myself. About 30 minutes into dinner, this woman walked in. She was tall, blonde, and dressed like she'd just stepped out of a magazine. She spotted our table and made her way over with this confident stride. My boyfriend greeted her cheerfully and told everyone that Karen had arrived. The group welcomed her warmly and mentioned they had saved her a seat. She sat down right across from me and I could feel her eyes scanning me from head to toe. It wasn't subtle at all. She took her time looking at my outfit, my hair, even my jewelry. I felt like I was being appraised at an auction. She asked if I was the girlfriend she'd been hearing about. I confirmed that I was and said it was nice to meet her, mentioning that I'd heard a lot about them all from my boyfriend. That's when she said it. She leaned back in her chair with this smug smile and told me that I was the current one, calling me cute in the most condescending way possible. The entire table went silent. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop. I sat there frozen, not sure if I'd heard her correctly. Did she really just call me the current one like I was some temporary placeholder? I looked around the table waiting for someone to say something. Anything. Maybe tell her that was inappropriate or ask what she meant by that. But nobody did. They all just sat there looking uncomfortable, staring at their plates or suddenly becoming very interested in the wine menu. I turned to my boyfriend, expecting him to defend me or at least ask her to clarify what she meant. Instead, he let out this awkward little laugh and immediately changed the subject by asking Karen about her new job. She launched into a cheerful explanation about how much better her current position was compared to her last one. And just like that, they all started chatting about her career like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just insulted me to my face in front of everyone. I sat there in complete shock, feeling like I was in some alternate reality where being disrespected was perfectly normal. I tried to participate in the conversation, but every time I spoke, Karen would either ignore me completely or give me these condescending looks. When I mentioned that I work in marketing, she made this little snort sound and said something about how everyone thinks they're in marketing these days. The worst part was watching my boyfriend. He was acting completely normal, laughing at her jokes and reminiscing about old times. It was like I wasn't even there, or worse, like what she'd said to me didn't matter at all. After 20 more minutes of this torture, I had enough. I stood up and grabbed my purse, announcing that I needed to head home, and that it was nice meeting everyone. My boyfriend asked where I was going and pointed out that they hadn't even ordered dessert yet. I told him I wasn't feeling well and that I'd talk to him later. I walked out of that restaurant as fast as I could without actually running. Once I was outside, I called an Uber and waited on the sidewalk, trying not to cry. I felt humiliated and angry, but mostly I felt hurt that my boyfriend hadn't stood up for me. The ride home felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. I kept replaying the whole scene in my head, wondering if I was overreacting or if I had every right to be upset. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and tried to process what had just happened. My phone started buzzing about an hour later. It was him calling. He immediately asked what that was about and accused me of totally embarrassing him that night. I asked if he was serious, pointing out that I had embarrassed him. He said that I had made such a big deal out of nothing, claiming that Karen was just being Karen and had a weird sense of humor, but didn't mean anything by it. I explained that she had called me the current one, like I was some temporary girlfriend he was going to replace next month. He told me I was being way too sensitive and that she was probably just trying to be funny. I asked him how that was supposed to be funny and pointed out that he knew it wasn't, adding that he should have said something. He replied that he didn't want to get involved in drama between us two and that I should have just been chill about it. He was actually trying to make this my fault. When I asked if he wanted me to apologize for having self-respect, he said he wanted me to apologize to Karen for walking out like a child. He explained that she was asking what she did wrong and that everyone now thought I was some kind of drama queen. That was the final straw. I hung up on him. The next morning I woke up to 3 text messages from him, all saying the same thing in different ways. He wanted me to call Karen and apologize for overreacting and making everyone uncomfortable. He said if I didn't, it would cause problems with his friend group. Instead of calling Karen, I decided to do some investigating. I went through his social media, something I'd never done before because I trusted him. What I found made everything crystal clear. There were photos going back years of him with different women at group events, parties, and dinners. Always the same friend group, always the same faces. But the girlfriend changed every few months. There was Sarah from 2 years ago, then Jessica, then Amanda, then a few others I didn't recognize. But in every single photo where Karen appeared, she was positioned right next to him. In some pictures, her hand was on his arm or shoulder. In others, they were standing closer than just friends typically would. I scrolled back further and found what I was looking for. Photos from college where Karen and my boyfriend were clearly a couple. They were kissing in some pictures, holding hands in others. There were even photos of them at what looked like formal events together. Everything made sense now. Karen wasn't just some friend with a weird sense of humor. She was his ex-girlfriend who was still very much part of his life, and she saw me as competition. The current one comment wasn't a joke, it was her way of letting me know that she'd been there before me and would probably be there after me too. I screenshotted several of the most telling photos and sent them to him with a simple message, telling him that now I understood why Karen felt comfortable calling me the current one. I mentioned how interesting it was that he forgot to mention they used to date and told him not to bother calling me again. He tried calling immediately, but I sent it straight to voicemail. He left message after message trying to explain that it was ancient history and that Karen didn't mean anything to him anymore. But the photos told a different story. I blocked his number and all his social media accounts. 2 days later, I got a friend request from Karen on Instagram. I was curious, so I accepted it just to see what she'd say. She sent me a message saying she heard we had broken up and that she wanted me to know there were no hard feelings. She mentioned that he always comes back to her anyway, so I probably dodged the bullet. She ended by hoping I'd find someone who actually puts me first next time. I screenshotted that message too and posted it on my Instagram story with the caption about how some people really tell on themselves without any help. I made sure to tag all of his friends who had been at that dinner. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up with messages from people asking what happened. Karen had a reputation for this kind of behavior, but nobody ever called her out on it because they didn't want to deal with the drama. 3 days later, one of his friends from the dinner reached out to me directly. He apologized for the other night and admitted that what Karen said was completely out of line. He said they should have spoken up and explained that they'd all been watching her do this to his girlfriends for years. He mentioned that most of them were pretty sick of it and thought I had handled it with way more class than she deserved. Several people from the group had been talking about how uncomfortable they were with Karen's behavior, not just toward me but toward all of his previous girlfriends. My walking out had started the conversation they should have had years ago. A week later, I heard Karen and my ex-boyfriend had gotten into a huge fight because she'd assumed they'd get back together after I was out of the picture. When he told her that wasn't happening, she lost it and caused a scene at another group gathering. The friend group ended up splitting over the whole situation. Some people sided with Karen, others were just tired of the drama and distanced themselves from both of them. I realized I dodged a massive bullet. Any man who would let his ex-girlfriend disrespect his current girlfriend and then blame the current girlfriend for being upset isn't worth my time. I'm better off without both of them in my life. After 3 years of constant business trips, I thought I had airport security figured out. I had my routine down to a science, laptop out, shoes off, belt removed, pockets emptied. I took pride in being efficient and helping other travelers avoid the mistakes I'd made early in my career. The whole thing started on a Tuesday morning flight to Denver. I was running late because my alarm didn't go off, and I was rushing through my usual pre-flight checklist. I grabbed my carry-on, threw on my favorite pair of aviator sunglasses, and headed out the door. The sunglasses were a recent purchase, expensive Ray-Bans that I'd bought to treat myself after landing a big client. When I got to security, I went through my usual routine. Laptop out, shoes off, belt in the bin. I walked through the metal detector feeling confident, only to have it start beeping immediately. The security officer waved me back. The security officer told me to step back through and remove any metal items I might have missed. I patted myself down confused. I've been so careful. Then I realized the sunglasses were still sitting on top of my head. I apologized and explained that it was my sunglasses. I took them off and handed them to another officer to put through the X-ray machine. But that wasn't good enough. The security officer told me that I needed to go back through the entire process again since I had triggered the detector. I asked if I could just walk through again without going through the whole routine, but he said no. Anyone who triggers the detector has to start over completely. I had to collect all my belongings from the bins, put my shoes back on, and get back in line with everyone else. The whole process took another 20 minutes, and I barely made my flight. I was frustrated and embarrassed, especially since other passengers were giving me annoyed looks for holding up the line. The Denver trip went well and I was feeling good about the successful client presentation when I headed back to the airport for my return flight 3 days later. I made sure to double-check everything before going through security this time. No sunglasses on my head, no forgotten coins in my pockets, no belt with a metal buckle. When I approached the security line, I noticed a woman in front of me who looked like she was about to make the same mistake I had made earlier that week. She was wearing sunglasses pushed up on top of her head, the kind that definitely had metal frames. She was dressed professionally in a business suit and seemed to be traveling alone. I figured I'd do her a favor and save her the embarrassment I'd experienced. After all, I knew exactly how frustrating it could be to get pulled aside and have to start the whole security process over again. I thought I was being helpful. I gently tapped her on the shoulder. She turned around partially and I could see she was probably in her 40s with short brown hair. I politely mentioned that her sunglasses would probably set off the metal detector. She turned around completely to face me. And that's when I saw it. Her right arm was completely prosthetic. Not just a simple prosthetic either, but a full mechanical arm with metal joints and what looked like metal hooks for fingers. It was clearly a high-tech medical device, but it was obviously made of metal components. Without missing a beat, she looked me straight in the eye and raised her prosthetic arm slightly. She asked me what I thought about her arm, pointing out the obvious metal components. I turned red. I felt like the biggest idiot in the entire airport. Here I was trying to warn someone about a pair of sunglasses, potentially setting off a metal detector when she was traveling with an entire prosthetic limb made of metal. I started stumbling over my words, trying to apologize. I told her I was sorry and that I didn't mean anything by it, but she started laughing. She told me not to worry about it and that it happens more than I'd think. She mentioned that usually people notice the arm before they worry about her sunglasses. I explained that I felt terrible and was just trying to help because the same thing had happened to me earlier that week with sunglasses. She said it was sweet of me to try to help since most people just mind their own business in airport lines. When we moved forward in the line, she explained that she travels frequently for work too and has a special card from the Transportation Security Administration that explains her prosthetic. She told me that security is usually pretty smooth for her because the officers are trained to handle medical devices. When she went through the metal detector, it beeped. But instead of the hassle I'd experienced, she simply showed her card to the security officer, who waved her through after a quick additional screening with a handheld detector. She pointed out that it was much easier than my sunglasses situation, still chuckling about the whole thing. I went through right after her without any issues this time. When we were both putting our shoes back on, she mentioned that this was definitely going on social media. She said her friends were going to love this story. I admitted that I probably deserved that. She agreed that I did deserve it, but in a good way. She explained that it is not often someone tries to help a stranger in an airport, even if they stick their foot in their mouth while doing it. We ended up walking toward the same gate area, and she told me more about her work in medical device sales, which explained both the frequent travel and her sense of humor about the whole situation. She said she'd learned early on that being able to laugh about awkward moments made travel much more bearable. By the time we reached our respective gates, I realized that what could have been a mortifying experience had turned into a pleasant conversation. She was right though, I definitely got owned, and I had a feeling this story was going to end up online somewhere with me as the well-meaning but clueless protagonist. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.